Hello, everyone, and welcome to Generative Now. This is the show where we talk to the builders who are creating the world's most exciting AI products and companies. We get their perspectives on how AI will impact the world we all live in today, right now, and in the future. I am your host, Michael Mignano. I am a partner at Lightspeed, a global venture capital firm that has been one of the earliest investors in companies like Snap, Affirm, Nest, Grubhub, Giphy, and many, many others, including a bunch of AI companies. In fact, we've invested over $1 billion across more than 50 AI native companies. And today we've got an awesome guest for you. We've got Connor Zwick, the co-founder of Speak, the company that is changing the way that people learn languages through the world's most advanced AI-powered tutor. Before Speak, Connor got his start building tech companies in middle school, first by teaching coding online and then founding Flashcards Plus, which was acquired by Chegg in 2013. This was such an awesome conversation. We talked about Connor being accepted as a Thiel Fellow right out of high school, and then even sneaking into Berkeley classes with his Speak co-founder to learn all about AI and machine learning. Without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Connor Zwick, co-founder of Speak. Connor, great to see you. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Excited to get into it.
What I like to do with these is I like to go all the way back. To really understand Speak, I feel like we need to understand Connor. So can you take us back to the beginning? Give us some information on your background, growing up, the formative years of Connor Zwick.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. All the way back. Okay. Let's see. Originally, I'm from Wisconsin, typical kind of suburban American upbringing. Hadn't really traveled that much. But one thing I did have was a computer from a pretty young age. My mom had her own little business and she had computers that she would pass down to me. And so I was always just like, from as early as I can remember, I was always like on the computer. Definitely my parents thought I probably spent too much time on the computer. But yeah, I just, growing up, was always super interested in technology. Kind of taught myself how to program when I discovered what JavaScript was. Started a bunch of like little businesses in, middle school, high school around like teaching people how to code and building like, programming for people and stuff like that. And that's kind of like, that was kind of like where I came from, and have been kind of just doing that ever since.
What kind of computer were you using when you were doing all this?
Man, I wish I was using a Mac, but I was using old Windows. I think, what was the first Windows? Like, what was the one before Windows 95? And then Windows 95.
3.1, 3.11, right? Something like that. Yeah.
I have like distant memories of the older computers too. They were like the old like printers with the little side ribbons. And yeah, it was fun stuff back then. Everything was so cool.
You built like the original Code Academy. You were teaching coding online from some of those early machines.
Yeah, it's a funny little story. I mean, I don't know. I think Code Academy may have been kind of parallel to this, but when I was, when I think it was in middle school, there was this website called Tuts Plus, TUTSPLUES.com and NetTuts, and I like learned how to program or I was like reading the articles from the site. And I realized, anyone, can submit articles to this website and you can get paid. And so I started submitting a few of them, for like learning Ruby, learning JavaScript, CodeIgniter, all this stuff. And, they didn't ask me any questions. They accepted the articles and they started sending me like, it was like good money. And I just started writing more and more of these articles. I became like pretty popular, one of the like primary authors of this website that had a lot of views. It was definitely one of the primary websites back then for learning how to code. And eventually they offered me the position of editor, and I would have to move to Australia and be like a salaried employee. And then I had to like level with them and be like, look, guys, I'm only 11 years old. I don't think this is going to work out.
I didn't realize the age we were talking about here. Oh my God, that's amazing.
Maybe 12. Yeah.
So you're writing these articles. You're playing with the Windows 3.11 computer. What happens in high school before you go away to college?
Yeah, so I was a student at the time, so I built an app to solve one of my own problems, which was like everyone in my classes, they were using flashcards, like the index cards to like study things. And I was like, oh, this is, an iPhone is approximately the size of one of these index cards. I'll just make an app that like digitizes those flashcards and people can do it on their phones. And so I built that as a little side thing, release it. I still haven't finished the other app yet at this point. And it just like really hit a nerve. I mean, the bar back then was pretty low, but like I remember the first day I like logged into iTunes Connect. Back then it was iTunes Connect, I think. And it had like 12 downloads. And I was like, okay, cool. Like I told 12 people, makes sense. Like that's cool that everyone downloaded it. The next day I had like 25 downloads and I was like, where did these people come from? And then the next day I had like 300 downloads. And then it literally just like cascaded from there. And it went on to be like one of the number one education app in the App Store for like a bunch of years. And that's like really how I got into technology, I think, was like the experience with that app was very like life-changing.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that reminds me that sort of in the early days of the App Store development, there was a lot of this sort of it was like that it was like the skeuomorphic era, right? Where everyone was mapping apps to like real world things, right? In the case of this, it was flashcards. And the Apple team, the editorial team loved that stuff, right? They loved like promoting all these apps that like mapped to these real world things.
It's like the red line on the top and the blue and all the little like lines of what like an actual index card looked like. It was so funny.
Yeah.
We were all figuring it out together in the early days,
That's awesome. Like, give us the story of flashcards. Did it wind down? Did you sell it? Like, what happened to it from there?
The short version of the story is that I eventually did sell it, but it was like many years later, actually. So it was always this thing that I was working on. It felt like a huge part of my identity. I went to college for a bit before dropping out, and I probably sold it a year or two after that. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely the thing that opened the doors for me. Like the day after I graduated from high school, I was on a plane to San Francisco, and I moved to San Francisco. There's a VC firm that like tried to get me to come out for the summer and not even go to college and just work on this full time because they wanted to invest. And so it definitely like was the thing that really kind of got me into the world that I'm in today. It was always just like my own project.
And as these VCs are trying to draw you out to Silicon Valley and all, like, did you know anything about starting a tech company? Or, I mean, were you just a kid in Wisconsin that happened to build an app? Like, you know what I mean? Like there's this whole other world to building a tech company. Did you know anything about that?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, I was like an avid reader of TechCrunch, right? Like I followed the news and I remember when Twitter came out and all that, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know the nuts and bolts, the dynamics of what it takes to like build like an actual venture style business at all. I like to joke that like I feel like when I was that age, I thought I knew everything, and I like absolutely knew like nothing at all. Like one of the reasons I didn't lean into flashcards, even though I had all this pull from users that were actually like using it, and I had actually built something people loved, was I just didn't think it was like a big idea or ambitious enough. And in retrospect, I could have totally leaned into it, and I probably made it even better and bigger than it was. But I just had no idea what I was doing back then.
Yeah.
I think that world has changed though at this point.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Do you feel like, okay, so maybe a lesson was you could have leaned into it, but again, we'll get to the full Speak story. So we're skipping ahead a little bit, but were you able to draw any lessons from flashcards that you still to this day have now mapped to Speak?
Yeah, I think like, I think one of the biggest lessons was just realizing what product market fit pull looks like. I think I was fortunate that I had that early and I saw what that looked like. It's very hard to define, right? It's like this famously difficult thing to articulate. But I think that allowed me to realize, at least in the case of Speak, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but like it was many years of grinding and choosing not to scale something that was subpar product market fit, and like continuing to like iterate until we actually felt like the market was pulling us and telling us something. So I think that was like definitely, in retrospect, one thing I learned. I do think like just the nuts and bolts of building it, I learned a lot of the like mechanics of building a company and what that looks like, how to partner with other people. Like we partnered with a few other like education companies. I guess like one really big thing was like I just learned like how when it was acquired by Chegg, right before they went public, like the negotiation process there, how to like value a company, what that means, what are like the actual things of value that you're building versus not. Like for instance, they scrapped the accelerator code base immediately when they took over and rebuilt the entire thing from ground to look exactly the same, but like in a better technology. The code was not worth a single, cent. But yeah, like I think that was like a big lesson. It was just like what is like actually valuable versus what's not valuable, and really like ruthlessly focusing on the stuff that really matters. Yeah, those are some of the early lessons, I think.
I think the product market fit lesson was probably very, very valuable, right? Like there's a big difference between pushing the boulder up the mountain and it rolling down the other side of the mountain on its own. And like, I think if you've never felt that before, it's pretty easy to talk yourself into, it's going down naturally, right? And so that was
right.
probably like hugely valuable.
Right. And also like the fact that like that's the only thing that matters. Like, I feel like I learned at a relatively young age, like press doesn't matter unless it gets you product market fit and like actual durable traction. Conferences don't matter. Like going to like events don't matter unless you're like going to actually meet people that you can like hire or work with. Fundraising doesn't matter unless it can advance, the actual value you're providing for your users and capturing. Right. And so I do think like that was probably like a very fortuitous thing to learn young in my career. Is just like the focus, just like the ruthless focus on like the core things that actually matter, and being able to kind of like see past all the things that I think distract a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. That's an awesome story. Okay, let's get into. So you graduate and then you said you got on a plane, right?
Yes,
I got on the plane. Yeah. So what happens after that plane ride?
I hated San Francisco. I literally just stayed in my house the entire time. So it's not like the fun post high school graduation summer that I'm sure some people had. And then at the end of it, I decided to go to university. I was lucky to get into Harvard, honestly, mostly probably because of the app. Like it was like a differentiator. Yeah.
I never really thought about that, but it makes total sense, right? Like that building an app or a company could be a part of your college application, but I guess it makes total sense. It's just rare.
How do you differentiate if you're totally. Like a Harvard or a Stanford or something? How do you you get so many people, they all look the same on paper. Anything unique, I think, is probably really valuable. I don't know. I never paid attention to that stuff growing up, and I never really put much stock in it. So I went to school for 1 year. Absolutely loved it. I mean, I've always it was filled with amazing people. It felt so like selfish to me to just be able to focus on like learning things and following my curiosity and all that. I was still working on flashcards, but I was like coming out to San Francisco all the time because of flashcards to meet with people or to do things. And towards the end of it, I think I just started thinking about the fact that there was an opportunity cost to me being at school. I also simultaneously met a really good friend at Harvard that I felt like would be really fun to work on something with. And we got really excited about a different idea. And so long story short, we actually ended up dropping out of school. I applied for and got like the Thiel Fellowship, which was the second year of the Thiel Fellowship. And we got into the YC Summer 12 cohort. And we dropped out of school and joined YC. And that was kind of like the next step.
Tell us a little bit about the mystique of the Thiel Fellowship. It feels like it's this super exclusive cabal of very, very successful founder. I mean, I feel like if you meet a really, really successful founder, there's like a good chance they were a Thiel Fellow. Tell us about that. What was that like? And how does that all go down? Do you apply? Does somebody reach out to you?
Yeah, I can't remember if someone eventually reached out, but I definitely did do an application. I feel like the first few batches in particular, it got so much hype and press that like when I was doing it, I think it was like CNBC or NBC or someone like literally filmed a documentary during our entire like finalist weekend. And there was like this like 5-part TV series that was like airing. It was like totally overhyped. And they made us feel like we were like, what's the like school called? The Academy in X-Men, where there's like for the misfits and mutants. It felt like that. It was absurd.
But it does seem to correlate with like really successful founders.
Well, I feel like especially back then, like you're just looking at outliers, like who the hell at that age is thinking about this stuff and like actually wants to drop out of school or like didn't even go to school because they were working on something ambitious and impressive. And like if you look at the original lineup of people, like half the ideas were absolutely crazy. Like there was like asteroid mining. There was an asteroid mining company. Everyone was like doing something like, Laura Deming wanted to stop aging. She's probably actually made a remarkable amount of progress in the last decade. But anyway, like it was like a ridiculous cohort of people and very like extreme outcomes, I think in both ways, right? Like you look at the top half and it was like one thing. And I, honestly, like I feel like half, at least at the time, I'd be curious to see where they are now. Like I felt like the other half were going to like end up like, homeless or something. Like it was just like, there was such a level of like kind of almost insanity to the group, or just like extreme. But yeah, like it was amazing. Like it opened so many doors, like especially back then, like anyone was willing to meet with you. It was definitely a huge opportunity to like build a network early, which I've never been good at like doing intentionally, but it was like super fortuitous. I think probably the biggest thing though is like the early community aspect of that. And like all of us being in this thing together. It was like move out to San Francisco, take 2. First time I hated it, thought I was never going to move back. And second time, I was now still very young, but like, still couldn't go to bars. But like, we ended up moving into a house with a bunch of other Thiel Fellows, and like, it was just like it was like a very cool community. They did really good like quarterly kind of like off like trips with everyone, so we would like really get to know each other and bond. And so a lot of my best friends today, like a bunch of people I got married in May, like a bunch of my groomsmen were Thiel Fellows from that cohort, and my co-founder for Speak was a Thiel Fellow, and a lot of the investors in Speak are Thiel Fellows. I don't know. It was a very, very cool community. And yeah, really interesting.
So the co-founder that you met at Harvard, that was your Speak co-founder. That's Andrew, and you both got into Thiel, and you applied to YC for Speak at the same time.
So not quite. We did a different company.
Oh, okay.
And my co-founder for the first company was called Coco Controller. It was basically like a physical device that you would put on your phone and it would turn it into like an entire gaming console. And we could definitely go into that. But that was the first company, and was kind of doing that in parallel with Flashcards. And then Andrew, my co-founder for Speak, was someone I met through the Thiel Fellowship, and we were just friends. The funny story is, my co-founder for the first company, after that was wound down, he went back to Harvard, finished, and now he's our COO. So we kind of got the gang back together like a year and a half ago. And it's been really awesome. In a parallel universe, he would have just started Speak with us instead of going back. But, certain things are, I guess, just inevitable. So
yes. Give us like the quick on Coco Controller, like quick lessons, and maybe how long did that last, that entire cycle?
That was what we did YC with the first time around. I remember halfway through the batch, we had office hours with Paul Graham, my idol, and he basically predicted the next year in 1 or 2 lines. He was like, "You guys are in deep shit. You're going to have a horrible time fundraising."
Why? Because it was hardware? Or?
Yeah, we were like 19 working on a hardware project. We like I taught myself electrical engineering to build the first circuit boards. I had no place, doing this. We made it remarkably far. Like we were building units in China in a factory. We came close to getting a distribution deal with Apple, but at the end of the day, like it was super hard to pull off. We weren't the right team to build something like that at that time. Like we would have needed to fundraise like a lot, and we weren't able to tell the story effectively, so we didn't know enough about fundraising. I think like honestly, probably the main thing I learned was like do software. But also like
infinitely scalable.
Yeah, like there's a lot of stuff there, but it was definitely that was the first time we raised money. I learned a lot more about how to fundraise. It was very valuable. Like I definitely like am just a huge believer in like second time founders versus first time founders, because you just like if you're an investor, you get like they learned on someone else's dime, and now you can like. Now they've learned a lot of like the initial mistakes, gone through those pitfalls, and then they can just learn to at least avoid that first set. There'll still be more, but I think that's like all that stuff was what I learned.
Yeah. Was there any element of, I know you've been way ahead of the AI curve, and I'm sure we're going to get into that in a few minutes, but was there any element of AI in Coco Controller?
There wasn't. It was in the very early days. Like I think like ImageNet had just come out like a year or two into the controller. And so by the time we were winding that down, like the first few papers were kind of coming out, and all of that was starting to ramp up. And so that was actually probably part of the reason why we decided to kind of throw in the towel with it, partially just because I've always been from a young age intellectually very interested in AI. It almost feels like you're like playing God, where you're inventing intelligence. Like it's just like in my view, like the most incredible thing humans can do or achieve is create other sentient intelligence, or anything even close to it. And so I've always been interested in it, but I think part of it was also for us, like once we started seeing these papers come out, it was unavoidable. It was like a gravity well in terms of just like, we were of course going to start thinking about it, working on it.
So this was almost kind of an inspiration for shutting down Cocoa Controller.
Yeah, like I don't really remember the exact sequence. I think we'd kind of already given up on it. Apple was making our lives very difficult. We were working through the audio jack like Square. They didn't like that. They didn't like that we were trying to become a platform for games. So they were like using all of their levers to discourage us. But yeah, it was probably in the back of my head as well.
Interesting. Okay, so you wind down Cocoa Controller, then what?
Basically, the same time I'm winding down Cocoa Controller, I sell flashcards. So I've been operating flashcards kind of in the on the sidelines while I've been working on this. Really, like not doing anything, literally just letting it kind of in maintenance mode. It was still really popular, getting millions of downloads and users. And yeah, I think like it was probably within a matter of months where I had both basically one shut down, one was acquired. So after Flashcards was acquired, I was like, the one thing I knew for sure was I was never going to actually go work at Chegg. So I was like an advisor on paper, helped the transition, but that was pretty much it. And then
they try to get you to stay.
Yeah, they wanted me to stay. Obviously, you'd rather have the founder stay, but who knows? Maybe they didn't. I was like this punk that like mostly got lucky. Like no actual software, like real software engineering abilities. And at that point, who knew if the skeuomorphism maybe wasn't as good. But anyway, I think like I remember like just kind of having a little bit of like an identity crisis. Like I always had flashcards as part of my identity. I was like a founder type. What am I going to do next? I thought for a hot second, like maybe I should go back to school. Threw that out pretty quickly, though. And then, yeah, like all of this was kind of happening at the same time. But I think I was already kind of starting to become really obsessed with AI. And I just realized all the papers I'd read so far, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I wanted to spend all of my time reading papers and trying to like implement things, but I felt like I needed to learn a lot more before I could implement a lot of stuff. There were certain things that I just didn't understand at a deep enough level to really grok a paper. And so at that point, me and my future co-founder, Andrew, for Speak, we were roommates at the time. And Colton, actually our COO now, my old co-founder, all three of us were basically like, we want to study AI. I think we want to kind of dedicate our lives to this. Colton decided to go back to school, go that route. Andrew and I decided, we're not going to do that. We are in the center of it. We're in the, like, all these papers are people at either the big tech companies or Berkeley and Stanford, like pretty much universally. There's not going to be good people on the East Coast even to like learn from. And so we just decided we're going to spend 18 months of our life doing nothing but just trying to become as like knowledgeable as possible about everything that's happening. And that's basically what we did. Like, the biggest thing we did was we literally just looked up all the people from all the big papers, and we just tried to like spend as much time with them as possible. So like Andre Karpathy, I remember, like he was super nice. Like we literally cold reached out to him and we were like, we'd love to buy you coffee. Can we just like interrogate you about the latest blog post you wrote? So he would meet up with us, which was amazing that he was willing to do that. We ended up. I think shortly after that, we ended up discovering there were some pretty good courses that were just coming online for all the latest stuff at Berkeley, which is remarkable because literally none of this discipline didn't really exist a few years prior. So like having a university course on like deep learning in 2015 or whatever was not a thing, nowhere. And Berkeley was, I think, one of the first like real, I mean, there was like some super early like machine learning stuff, of course, but not like the interesting cutting edge stuff. And we found a course at Berkeley. It was like a graduate level course. It was about reinforcement learning, which was like the newest, like kind of most interesting.
Can you just explain it for listeners? Reinforcement learning.
Yeah. So, if people are following Gen AI, they may have heard of this concept of like RLHF, right? Reinforcement learning, human feedback. And basically the idea is that this was like when people were, releasing models to like, beat games, AlphaGo, or like StarCraft or any of this stuff. This is what reinforcement learning is. It's essentially like strategy-based intelligence. So it's like making the correct move over time and kind of keeping a strategy in mind to execute over time and like basically self-learning that. So like just like trying a bunch of times until you get like the rewards. And so that's why it's called reinforcement learning. Anytime you do a good thing, you say good robot and you give it a reward. Anytime it does a bad thing, you don't give it the reinforcement. And so very much like inspired by how the brain works and how humans learn. So this was showing a lot of really interesting promise. It was very intuitive that it would become a big, like maybe the path to AGI. And so a lot of people were focused on this. It ended up kind of mattering with like large language models because RLHF was a big unlock. And so OpenAI, even though anyway, it's a tangent, but OpenAI like was super interested in RL in the beginning. Everyone was, and then pivoted to LLMs, but like the RL stuff actually ended up being very useful still. But anyway, yeah, we found this course in 2015, back to the story. And we were like, what if we just show up? So it like had just started. I think it was like September of that year. And I remember going to Berkeley and we like take the BART there, me and Andrew. We have our backpacks on. We have like our notebooks. And we're literally walking. I think that's like was like the first week of school because it was like the first lecture. And we remember getting stopped by like an undergrad. And he was like, hey, my name's, whatever. And he introduces himself and he's trying to make friends because he thinks we're also just like these undergrads going to school. And we felt like such imposters because we literally were. And we end up like getting into the building and finding the classroom. And we were expecting a giant lecture hall. And it's literally like 12 people. And it's like a graduate level course about this like pretty specific topic. And so there's no one in the course. It's like no one had ever even really heard of reinforcement learning. They didn't even know what it was. And so we just like walk in and sit at the back of the classroom. Everyone's staring at us. It's very clear. Everyone kind of knows each other from other courses. And they're like, who are these people? But everyone's a little too awkward to actually like confront us, and including I think the lecturer definitely knew for sure. And it was so we just literally would go every single time. The lecturer ended up being John Schulman, who ended up being one of the co-founders of OpenAI. He was the one teaching it, even though Peter Abiel was like the actual professor. But like I'm sure Abiel like had less knowledge of reinforcement learning because it was such a new topic than John Schulman did, who was like, I think a grad student at that point, maybe. But anyway, it was like literally, I'm sure the people that were in that room, if I knew who they were, like they probably have all gone on to like join research labs and such.
Did he ever confront you? Did he ever stop
never,
you and say,
never.
Hey guys, I know you're not in this course. What are you doing here?
Yeah, never.
Did you ever have to submit any work?
So everything was on a public website. And so it was amazing. He would just give us the website and everything was there. He also I think there was a period where it was literally 3 or 4 weeks in a row where he was literally making the course as we went. And he like was too busy. And so he didn't create homework. And so there literally was no homework for like 3 or 4 weeks. And then he finally reveals this thing. And he's like, okay, this is going to be your new environment where you're going to like build your models and then it'll test on this. And I'm pretty sure this was like the first version of the OpenAI playground or gym, which is like their big reinforcement learning thing that he ended up doing at OpenAI. And he literally like spent 4 weeks on it to do to basically give us like a homework environment to build models in, casually producing this for his students. So it was pretty cool.
Did you ever tell him this story?
I actually don't. I'm actually pretty good friends with his wife now. I don't think I have. It'll be hilarious. At some point I will.
That'll be that'll be an amazing
I'd be very curious if he remembers those 2 randos in the back of the classroom.
That's incredible. Yeah. Okay. So you learn everything you need to know about AI by sitting in a Berkeley class that you had no business being in. Then what?
Yeah. Everything was published on archive. It was such an, open time in terms of all these papers being published. Basically, like what we did was our entire strategy was we want to just like implement as many papers as possible, build and learn by doing. And we eventually started building speech models. And so like one thing that I think was very, very, very important for Speak was we were building a speech recognition model. And while we were building it, we ended up deciding, why don't we try to like actually understand more than just the words that people are saying? Also, people are like, speech recognition models today are super bad for people speaking with accents or in loud environments. Like they basically were not accurate whatsoever, like basically not useful. And we were like, what if we try to intentionally find accented data on YouTube? We'll find like the BBC, for example, all that's in British English. We'll try to find stuff in like Indian dialect English, et cetera. And maybe we can make the model robust by including all this data. And we ended up building a model that could detect what accent people were speaking with and was incredibly robust to accents as well. And it was like basically state of the art. And it was like a weekend project we did. And I think for that was like a very kind of, holy shit moment for us, because the results were like mind-blowingly good. And it really laid bare to us. It was like probably the first thing that we did that was somewhat novel. And it laid bare to us that these things are really, really powerful. And we're clearly like, we're only mining the surface of what these things can do. And in our minds, I think it became very clear that it was, if you could extrapolate over time, it was merely a function of the amount of data that you have and like the size of the model and the compute. And invariably there'd be like ways to make the models be even like more efficient for training and everything. But as you do that, the accuracy of the model goes up and up and up and up like this. And we have like the entire internet to train on. And so it is just a matter of time until these models get to the level where at some point they're like better than a human, right? And at the time, at that point, that's like an inflection, because for all of these models, they're doing tasks that right now, fundamentally the only thing like machines can't do. And so as you approach human, you start to become really useful as like a helper tool, right? Like it's like an assistant tool in the way that like Copilot helps people, write code, but it's not going to really write a program all by yourself. But once you surpass, and that's super valuable by itself, but once you surpass humans, that's where it's really a true unlock. And we became convinced that like this is just a matter of time. And the kind of like mantra that we've had from day one is basically that like in the next 5 to 10 years, we'll be able to replace humans for language learning. But that's kind of how we think about most things. It was basically just like, it's only a matter of time. There's an inevitability here. These models clearly have a lot more juice to squeeze. And I think that's like where everything started from, was this like technological vision and really just like a complete conviction. Like it wasn't just a vision. We knew this was going to be the case. It was very, very clear. Like that models would just continue to get better. I mean, maybe not like AGI on a certain timescale, but like the models would, at least in narrow cases, surpass humans. And that was really like the underpinning for Speak. Once we knew that, we thought at least speech models could get to the point where they were eventually superhuman, we could see that like all the pieces would unlock to do a lot of things. And the thing that we kind of immediately got to was language learning. We envisioned like, we were super obsessed with the idea of like, okay, if in 5 years we have a model that's sufficiently good, what is like the thing that we want to be building? What feels like the most magical? And we wanted to make sure that it was something that humans could form a relationship with, something that felt really magical and that could really help them become like better versions of themselves. For a variety of reasons, we got really focused on language learning, and that was kind of like the way we started Speak. We knew absolutely nothing about language learning, but we were convinced that over time there'd be this thing that would be unlocked, and we'd be able to help literally millions of people improve themselves in this way that really like changes people's lives.
So I want to drill down into an insight you had before we dive into the Speak story, which is you mentioned that back then, and by the way, was this 2015, 2016 when you're having this realization about the data?
Yeah.
So it feels like post ChatGPT, there's this big realization that if you feed these models enough data, they do exactly what you just said, right? And that seems to be a bit of an insight or a breakthrough moment that I feel like a lot of people have had over the past year. It sounds like you guys could tell this was going to happen in 2015. Am I understanding that correctly? And do you feel like there were a lot of people like you that knew that this would happen with enough data and enough time? It wasn't like a secret.
No. This was not a secret. This was not just us. It was just a smaller group of people, right? That knew, I think. People that, like, less people were paying attention. But I mean, when we did YC, we did YC for Speak again, second time. And that was winter 2017 by that point. So we started in 2015 through 2016, started Speak at some point in late 2016, and then actually did YC. By that time, there was already a mini AI hype cycle that was happening. Like, there were a fair number of AI companies that existed in that batch. And there were VCs that were really interested in AI, and it was very hyped. Like, I remember one of the most common questions we got was like, well, you're not actually trying to like teach people languages though, right? This is a Trojan horse to collect data so that you can like build models and then offer an API to other companies and do a B2B angle, right? And we were like, no, like we actually just like think that when this happens, we can unlock like a consumer use case that like billions of people want, and we think that'll be a really big company. And they kind of looked at us like we were crazy. But there were a lot of people that were interested in like the data plays to unlock big AI models, and that was not like a super. I mean, I think the unique thing about us is we had a lot of conviction to persevere, because we really did understand it wasn't going to happen tomorrow. It was going to happen in 5 to 10 years. And we needed to like climb the steps to get there over time. So we'd be in a really good position to continue to build towards the long-term vision. And so I think a lot of these companies, like, an interesting question is like, of this earlier AI like hype cycle, like what big companies ended up emerging? And I think almost all the value, if you think about it, went to the incumbents. Like Google, like, they were able, like, the YouTube algorithm is so much better now because of deep learning, as just like one example. Ad targeting, huge unlock, like literally, tens of billions of dollars of value probably. So there are lots of unlocks, but it all went to incumbents. And maybe there were a few like, pick and shovel companies like Scale that emerged, but there weren't many.
But it seems like, to your point about the YouTube algorithm, and, I can think of other companies that have had similar breakthroughs. It's probably more on, like you said, the sort of deep learning side, less on more of the generative side, which has really emerged over the past year or so. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I guess what's really the difference is, I consider generative AI as
the creation,
just a buzzword.
Like, yeah, but I'm thinking about Speak, how it's talking back to you, right? Or I'm thinking about Midjourney, or these things that are actually like creating content and experiences. Right. I don't know. Maybe I'm mixing the two.
I mean, I think it's a little bit nuanced. There's clearly, I think, something different now, but I think really what's happening is that all these models are like, the transformer was created, the attention is all you need paper, I think, came out in like 2017 or something like that. Right, yeah. And so a lot of these models, like, they've like, all of this has existed. I don't really like think of it, like, for example, Whisper is superhuman level speech recognition. That's transformer architecture, and it's just generating a transcript given an audio input, right? At any model is fundamentally generating something. It might just be a classification or a recommendation, but it is like still generating some sort of output from an input. And so I always like am a little bit bemused by the fact that we're using this term generative AI. I've started using it as well, just because it's the term, it's like the parlance now at this point. But like, I don't really think, I think the big unlock was more just like that these models got really good. Like GPT-3 came out in 2020 or 2021. It just wasn't as good because it was like DaVinci 1 or like Ada before that. And the thing is, like, these models are just continuing to get better. The curve is starting to become even sharper over time, right? And I think like the only thing that's happened is like, basically it's continued to get better to a certain point that unlocked value. And really, more than anything, ChatGPT proves that the UI mattered, right? Like, ChatGPT was just the DaVinci 2 model, which was available for, I think, 9 months before ChatGPT came out. Anyone could have built ChatGPT, basically. If they had just like released that, no one did. And then they did, and everyone paid attention. And so I think really the function for me is like, it's the same thing. It's like everyone was working on, LLMs have been around for, at least 3-4 years at this point. And it's just a matter of like getting above a certain like utility level, I think.
So you decide you want to do something in speech, but you don't really know what yet. give us the story of Speak from sort of the beginning to product market fit, and when did that happen? You know, we talked about product market fit earlier. You now have the perspective that you know when it's real and when it's not. When did you know it was real? And give us the story to get there.
Yeah, well, it definitely took a few years of grinding. We knew nothing about language learning. I think even to back up a little bit further, we had this technology story in our heads, but I think another thing that was super helpful, that's a very specific memory for me, is that Andrew and I spent an afternoon and we just posed the question, in 5 years from now, what kind of company do we want to be running? At that point, we had decided we think the best way to do this is not to go into research, but to start a company.
Had you started the company yet?
I don't think so. Yeah. This was probably pre-starting the company. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Still just an idea. Okay. Got it.
Yeah. When we were doing research, we didn't even know if we wanted to start a company necessarily. We were intentional about like the best, like for our given motivations, we weren't necessarily sure that we wanted to do a company. But yeah, basically like we were like, in 5 years, what would be like the most kind of incredible kind of company or position to be in? And we became really captivated by the idea of building something magical. Something that really felt like novel and magical, and a big part of us for that was like something that you could actually interact with, and it would be like another human in the sense that it would feel like it understood you, and you were going back and forth in some way. And we felt like it was clear that like chatbots in general were a ways off, and it was less clear to us that would be 5 years from now. But we felt like and also when that happened, it would be something that like a giant tech platform company would probably do, and not us. We didn't think that we would be the ones to be able to do that. Yeah, and also it's just like such a general problem space that it felt like they would be in a much better position to do it. And we always knew it would be like the hardest problem to do. Like the bar would be that much higher to be able to do that. However, like one thing we realized was like language learning is actually the perfect thing here, because it's actually okay if the model isn't perfect. It's okay if it makes mistakes. And people are willing to talk with it anyway, because it's way better than the alternative, which is not having anyone to talk with, except for like a human, which judges you and is inconvenient and is expensive. And we realized it's like one of the, like, we thought about like what the categories could be of like what people want to interact with. We knew we wanted to do something more like straight consumer. We knew we didn't want to build for enterprise for this. And it's actually pretty limited. Like we pretty clearly identified early on, like language learning is one of the few things that adults do where they're willing to interact with a system like this and have it not be perfect. And it's one of the only areas of self-improvement and like, especially learning that adults do en masse in general. And it was perfectly aligned for what we saw as like the speech recognition would get to human level faster than the language side would, if that makes sense.
What do you mean not perfect? Like it's teaching you the wrong things, or just the language that it speaks to?
I mean, let's start with the speech recognition. Let's start with the speech recognition. Our first wedge here was the speech recognition. We knew we could do that well. And better than what Google could provide or anyone else, because the whole idea was we can get all this accented data from our users and then use it to train a model that's specifically good at like understanding them. And so let's just start there. But like, even if we don't pick up every single word the user says perfectly all the time, they'll still use the product. That was the hypothesis.
Got it.
Because it'll still be useful. But like if a chatbot like says kind of crazy things every once in a while, or it doesn't really like understand your words all the time, like you're just not going to use that. The bar is too high.
It's not like a finance application or something like where the stakes are really high.
The stakes are high.
We're just having we're having a conversation. It's fine if it's not perfect. Okay. Got
exactly. It. Yeah. And so it's actually one of the few cases, even today, where you have, back to what I was saying earlier, like there's a difference between like an assistant tool where the human is in the loop, right? Copilot, or even for like legal, right? Like it's going to be a very far time from now where, you know, we'll trust a legal review that's done by AI and there's no human in the loop, right? The stakes are way too high and mistakes are costly. And so there's actually very few use cases, even today, where you can have the AI fully replace the human with no intervention from a human whatsoever. Because for most things, the stakes are just too high. And so ChatGPT is one of those. I think language learning is another. I don't think there are that many right now. When that happens for other industries, it'll be a really big deal for those industries too. But I think that the hallucination rate and like a variety of other technical challenges are still too great that it hasn't happened yet. And I think that's like one of the most significant kind of like trends.
Got it. Got it. That makes a lot of sense, actually. And it's really good context and framing for what can be a viable AI application in 2023 or 2024. Okay. So you want to build a speech product because you feel like there's a tolerance for mistakes. Then what? Did you know what you wanted it to be at that point?
We had, very little of a vision around the specific way that we were going to teach people. Knew very little about language acquisition. And so, no, we started from scratch on all that. And that was like a huge challenge for us. I think there were a few points where we narrowed it down. Like one thing we fundamentally knew from very early on was we wanted to focus on speaking first because it was the area that was most important to people and the least supported. There are already apps like Duolingo that helped you with vocabulary building, basic grammar, all of that. That was covered. That's been covered for a long time. It's like way less valuable. But speaking wasn't, and it was also the area where we could build the best models to actually like replace that piece and actually get people speaking. The other thing we realized is that we needed some sort of like long-term vision where we could build steps along the way and continue to improve our product market fit. And it was still valuable in the intervening years. We did not want a research project for 5 years until the models were good. And then we're just going to go release something. We knew that like getting actual product market fit was tough. It was going to require a lot of iterations. And we just wanted to like launch things and rapidly move. And like maybe the product market fit in the beginning wouldn't be as strong, but we knew that over time we would be with a rising tide.
That's probably one of the things that you learned from Flashcards, that you need to be shipping product and getting feedback. Otherwise, so many first-time founders just build stuff for years before they ship it, but that feedback's so important.
It's something I learned with a controller as well. And it was a limitation with hardware. Even though I knew I needed to be doing that, I couldn't do it because it was hardware. 100%. And then, I think from there, we quickly honed in on the idea that okay, it's a vitamin for people like us that are native English speakers that want to learn Spanish to go to Mexico City or something. But people that are trying to learn English, wow, you don't realize that living in, a place where most people are speaking English. But if you don't live in an English speaking country, it is such a common need and it is an absolute painkiller. And man, there are way more of those people in the world than the other way around. So we quickly honed in on teaching English as well, at least to start.
That is a brilliant insight. Maybe it's such a subtle thing, but especially given that, so much of tech, Silicon Valley, obviously based in the US, you naturally think of products for people based in the US, right? Like that you said, are going to Mexico City. And clearly that's where products and companies like Duolingo have been very, very successful.
Right.
Maybe it seems obvious, but how did you have that insight? It's a simple one, but it's so powerful.
I think very early on, we realized even for me and Andrew, we realized, oh, we're not that motivated to learn a language. Okay, do we know people that are? And so the motivation piece came up very early. And then I think we just naturally, as we were thinking about the market, we realized wow, but what about the people that are in the US that need to learn English? Okay, well, what about the fact that English is the lingua franca? It's the way that a Chinese person speaks to a Korean person is they speak in English. And then we start to really uncover it. It's a total blind spot for a lot of people in the Western world, though, especially the English speaking countries. And so, I think that was a really big insight. And, also at the same time, a very hard pill to swallow because all of a sudden this meant operating in markets where we didn't speak the language. We weren't familiar with the culture. We didn't even understand how to grow an app in these other markets. And it was a cerebral insight, but it was very difficult to operationalize it, if that makes sense. And it was definitely something that was required a lot of commitment again to the idea that long term this is the right strategy.
Yeah.
And then from there we realized, okay, even if we're doing that, now we're talking about teaching to a Chinese speaker, a Korean speaker, a Spanish speaker, a French speaker, a Hindi speaker, right? All of these different language groups that were so vastly different. How do we start? And so we ultimately, we could go into it if it's interesting, but we ultimately decided we're going to even go more specific than this. We're going to just pick one country and one language, and we're going to get really, really zoomed in to that place. At this point, we've been struggling to find product market fit for a while, I should add. Probably.
How long? How long is this journey to be hey, we need to be starting other countries and other languages?
I think probably it took us 6 months to even understand what a early iteration could look like that made sense, and testing a bunch of bad ideas first. And then we realized, pretty shortly after that, okay, we need to teach English. And then it took us probably another 3 or 6 months to realize, okay, we need to go small. We need to go specific. We need to go pick a country. And then it took another year to find product market fit. So we were grinding for years. But yeah, we ended up picking South Korea.
How do you do that? Like, I mean, yeah, I wouldn't even know where to start.
Yeah, it was. I think like it was a combination of many things. This is probably one of the most common questions I get from like everyone, from prospective employees, from investors, from random people. It was a combination of the fact that, number one, we had a product out in many markets, and we saw that Korea is one of the places where people were using it in really interesting ways. And so there was natural, like, this population of users, clearly there's something going on here. Let's take a closer look. I also ended up literally just traveling to a bunch of different countries and talking with our users for this early product. And Korea was one of those countries. And the thing that immediately stood out when I was in the country, and I had done the research, right? We saw that, like, a crazy statistic that South Korea spent 1% of their entire GDP on learning English. And all of this like stuff around like the national obsession with it, and the idea that no one, but it's still like one of the lowest like English speaking ability countries. But really, I think one of the things that cemented it for me was the fact that when I was driving down a street in Gangnam with all the big skyscrapers, my friend who was kind of my tour guide was pointing out different skyscrapers and was like, that is English Learning Academy. That's an English Learning Academy. Every single one of those windows you see in this giant skyscraper, those are all English classrooms. There are people here that are going after work or after school, and they're studying for 3 hours late into the night every single day, English. And I was like, okay, this is crazy. This market is really interesting. And we realized, like, okay, hyper competitive market, lots of noise out there, lots of different English solutions and companies and products, super noisy. But if we can build something that's truly technologically differentiated, true product differentiation, right? That proverbial 10x, then we'll get really good signal here. Because we also know people are really eager to actually get success here, and they're willing to try anything. And so we'll get that market pull more here than anywhere else. We'll get the signal we care about for this long-term product market fit, which is the only thing that matters here more than anywhere else. And so that's basically how we did it.
I can't imagine like a more appropriate or more fitting metaphor for potential disruption than you driving down the street and seeing English teaching skyscrapers and saying to yourself, we're gonna go disrupt that
with people that are teaching that don't speak English, by the way.
Right. That is crazy. So okay, you realize South Korea is your target market. By the way, you said you had I want to back up a little bit. You said you had a friend as a tour guide. Like, what was this? Did you have like a person in each of these cities, like giving you a sales pitch for why their country should be Speak's target market? Like, explain that.
Yeah, some of them I did. Some of them in some way or another. I just like, it's like Andrew's parents are from Taiwan. So like when I was in Taiwan, his parents were showing us around. In Korea, it's actually a really funny story as well. This is the single biggest ROI I got. I guess I met my first co-founder as well, but the second or equally positive ROI for going to Harvard for 1 year, which is that one of my roommates freshman year happened to be someone that was originally from South Korea, lived there until he was like 11 or 12, and then moved to the United States. And so he was like one of these rare individuals, very rare individuals, who's like perfectly native in both places and still like has a foot in both. And so I actually, he's like a very good friend of mine. And I texted him when I decided I was going to go to Korea. And I was like, hey, how do you feel about going to Korea and visiting your family, all expenses paid trip from, on my company? And he was like, all right, I'll take time off right now. This sounds awesome. So he flew there with me. And we had an amazing time because we were like really good friends. But he also he was working in New York at the time at Rent the Runway as like a product or data analyst or product analyst. And he was asking, like, when we were doing interviews with users, he would just talk with them for like 10 minutes. And I'd be like, what was that entire conversation? He was like, well, okay, I knew you wanted to ask this, but ultimately, like, this was the more interesting thing. So we just like kind of had this entire conversation. Don't worry, I have notes here, but basically this is the takeaway. And it was like much higher quality interviews because he was just like so good and so smart. So maybe that was also a reason we went to South Korea, unknowingly, because the interviews were so much higher quality. But I was in the back of my head, that was like in November. In the back of my head, I was like, okay, that was awesome doing that with him. By December, we decided a few weeks later, okay, we're going to go to South Korea. This is it. And so I texted him again, and I was like, hey, I have another crazy idea. What if you quit your job, move to San Francisco in a week, and join Speak as basically our first employee and help us figure out South Korea? And he's like, okay, let me think about it. And then I think literally later that day, he was like, all right, I'm in. Wow. Let's do this. And he's still at the company to this day. Absolutely like pivotal role.
What's his role?
Literally, he's done every role under the sun up until now. He like figured out our content pedagogy strategy from scratch, became an expert there, did that, like really pushing the boundaries there. I think it's one of our strengths is like how much better we are in terms of language acquisition than anyone else. We've basically like invented our own playbook. Now he's doing product work. But he's done so many different things, and was like, he's just like classic kind of like barrel versus ammunition type. You could just give him something, but like, he's like the secret weapon that allowed us to figure out South Korea, because the last thing I ever imagined in my life before starting Speak was that I would be, for like a good 3 or 4 years, exclusively operating a South Korean consumer app company.
Yeah, it's such a crazy concept, right? I mean, especially you're somebody that's built a product in the US before. As you and I have talked about, I'm a former founder, I've built products here in the US. And it's so, I think it's so important for the founders to be able to see that sort of real-time feedback between what you're shipping and what the users are saying, like in real time. You can't see that. I mean, I don't think you speak the language, or maybe I missed that part. No. Maybe you do now.
Yeah.
So like, what is that like? What is it like building a product for another market, especially a startup where like that signal is so important?
I think especially even consumer, right? Like
totally
getting consumers to drop everything in their busy lives and go spend not even their money, their time on an experience, especially not like an addictive entertainment experience or a game, but like something that like takes real motivation and willpower. This is why it took so long to figure out, because I like to joke that like every company has like their one unique challenge. They have like the one thing that's like really weird about that company. For us, it was the fact that the founders had never been to South Korea before. We didn't speak the language, and we were operating in, San Francisco and not in Seoul. That was our challenge. And it very much felt like in many ways, it was like one hand tied behind your back when it came to like product iteration and product work, and really force you to like do the best practices, not take the shortcuts, which I think really strengthened us. And the other really big benefit was that when it came to international expansion, which we have been heavily focused on this year, it's not like most companies when they start international expansion, they're like, oh, okay, we're live in the US. How do we go operate in like the UK or something? For us, and it's like a very new muscle to build. For us, our first market was international expansion. Like we've been an international expansion expert company from the very beginning. So we had 4 years of doing that before we went to another market. And so, we knew how to hire, we knew the playbook, we knew like how to localize, we knew how to like design in one language, but then ship something in a different language. We knew how to like do the interviews. Everything like it was something we had like down to a science, in terms of like operating and expanding to new markets. From many years of doing it in South Korea, which is another funny kind of consequence.
So once you decide to go all in on South Korea, at this point you have the product available globally. Now you're just deciding to focus. Is that right? And then how long till things really start working in South Korea?
Yeah, it probably took, after being exclusively in South Korea, it probably took like a few months until we started getting like some real pull, and then another like year before we were like, okay, this is something that we definitely want to, like, the foundation is there and we want to continue to iterate on top of this core like vision and model. And so there were a lot of like little things that all incrementally added up to like a cohesively good experience. But I think it probably took, at least 4 more quarters until we were like at that point. And then we started like really thinking about growth and trying to actually like scale that up.
Got it. Talk us through the actual Speak experience. I mean, right now we've been talking mostly about the insight to be in another market, to teach English as a language. But for people that haven't tried the product, and I imagine there will be some that haven't, given that it's it's targeting teaching English. What is it like compared to, say, Duolingo for learning a non-English language?
Yeah. Well, the name speaks, kind of says it all, right? Like the entire idea is we want to build an experience that feels as close to possible to just kind of having this, across the table experience where you're chatting with this like friendly tutor type, and they're just teaching you from the ground up how to become conversationally fluent by getting you to speak out loud a lot, like a ton. Like you're speaking more than 50% of the time. And we're not teaching you grammar. We're not teaching you like weird vocabulary. We're literally just going to focus on teaching you the like core building blocks of actual fluency as if you were in the country or you were like a kid learning for the first time. Like we're just exposing you to the language. And instead of, for example, teaching you, like a classic thing in America or in any language school or, classroom is like the idea of like, okay, we're going to teach you how to conjugate this verb in every single form. And then we're going to teach you the present tense and then the past tense and then the future tense and the like X, Y, Z grammar. And you're going to learn every single one of those forms and memorize it. And then we're going to teach you some vocabulary. And then you're going to be able to say sentences like, I eat at the library. I ate at the library. Like sentences that you will never use in real life at all.
Right.
And for us, we're not going to teach you any of that. We're going to teach you like the three most common ways to use the word eat in actual phrases you're going to use. Like, I love to eat out, or I like to do this thing, or what did you have to for breakfast yesterday? Oh, I had a blank. We're not even teaching you ate. We're actually teaching you I had, because that's the thing that you're actually going to learn and use, the high frequency stuff. And we're not teaching you the underlying logic necessarily of the grammar, but we're going to teach you like the phrases and the patterns that you need so that you can be like, I had or I had the blank with the blank. And then we teach you a bunch of relevant vocabulary words that fit into those sentences. And then we marry it all together by having you learn a bunch of different phrases and patterns that you repeat so many times that it becomes automatic. Those words are now co-located together, so they all roll off the tongue automatically, and you're not translating in your head. You're never translating. And then we marry it all together by having, now all of a sudden, 5 or 6 different patterns and phrases and a little bit of vocabulary that fits with those things. And we put you in a situation where those are actually all the building blocks you need to functionally go do something that you need, that you care about. Like, I want to talk about like going out to eat, or I want to be at a restaurant and be able to order food. And all of a sudden you realize, oh, wait, I can do that now. I've just unlocked this like little part of the universe of fluency of this language, like for this specific use case. I can go do that now at a fluent level.
It makes so much sense. Anytime I've ever learned a language, and I'm sure you've had similar experiences, it's about the immersion, right? It's about talking to somebody. It's not about going through those hypothetical exercises like you mentioned. So is the insight here that enabled this basically that you could take large language model, style application like a ChatGPT, and you could take, really, really great text to speech, and you could effectively enable a human style voice conversation. Is that really the insight that led to this product breakthrough? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's part of it.
Different than like a rules-based system like I'm sure Duolingo has, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I think the reality is that we knew that we didn't have like the complete answer on day one, but what we knew was that all these models were going to get better and better and better and surpass humans, and we'd be able to use them in a myriad of different ways. But probably much more important than that, and to our approach, and I think this is super relevant for anyone doing anything in the generative AI, world. And, a lot of people know this intellectually, but they still, I think, make the mistake, is like, you need to actually solve real problems. And it's not just about a technology in search of a solution. But like in the case of Speak, a huge insight for us. And we've seen this mistake play out with all the other companies that are now trying to do the same thing, is it really matters that we've been able to build an expertise and actually cross-functionally fuse the machine learning and the technology piece and the vision part and building that technology with the content approach that I was just talking about, which was hard learned lessons by doing lots and lots of interviews with users, measuring progress over time, and just years of iteration and building that expertise and figuring out how to marry it with the machine learning for today and tomorrow. but then also like building novel product experiences that can combine the content and the pedagogy with the machine learning capabilities of today and tomorrow, and doing all that together to actually solve people's problems and not become just obsessed with what we can do with the latest AI demo and just kind of glue it all together into a product that people want to use once because it's flashy on Twitter, but then they never come back and they don't retain.
Yeah, there's so much AI tourism happening with products right now. People trying things just because they're doing new things. But to your point, you need to solve real problems for somebody to keep coming back and for you to have that product market fit. So what does product market fit for Speak look like? You know what it feels like. When did you feel it? Maybe a way to answer that would be give us a sense of at least what you're comfortable sharing, the scale of this thing in South Korea right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like at a high level, the way I think about it is like, it's like top line growth and retention. Those are like the things that matter. Like if you're growing naturally, it's not because you're like an absolute paid marketing machine or something like that, but it's just kind of happening without you doing anything. And people are sticking around and retaining. Those are the signs. Those are like pretty much the only scorecard that matter. In terms of like, where we are today in Korea, like we're the number one most popular education app there. I think we've had roughly 6% of the entire population have tried and used our app.
Wow.
Now they're not all paying subscribers yet, but we think we can get there. But yeah, it's quickly becoming like if it's not already a household name, it's getting there. And we've helped a lot of people, I think, which is the most important part. Like a lot of people have substantially improved. It's really cool. It's so cool to see that, like, talk to users and like see how much progress they've made.
That's awesome. So now, like you said, this year you've been very, very focused on expansion in new markets. Any specific markets that are worth mentioning? I think it's a remarkably transferable product, which has been awesome to see. Japan has been a really, really interesting market to us. It's in some ways, a lot of similar learnings, just more for Japan, just bigger, even more intention in some ways, which has been surprising. Generally, we're seeing this as universal. Like we're live in many markets now. We're live in over 20 countries. We want to like double that by the end of the year. And basically the goal is to be globally available as soon as possible. I do think like the really cool thing about software and like the entire vision here is it's not like we're scaling a tutor marketplace that is, something that is tricky and like just squishy to actually be able to scale the quality across the new markets and figure out those dynamics like a DoorDash or something. But it's just software. It's just a way to get people talking, and like this, everyone learns languages in fundamentally kind of the same way. You need to just like practice it and use an experience like Speak. So overall, like what's been really encouraging is just like, it does feel like anywhere with this fundamental motivation, people are willing to like go give the product a shot. And then if it works for them, they'll stick around. So if you want to be universally available, then I'm guessing at some point you switch to teaching English speakers other language. Is that part of the plan?
Absolutely. Yeah. The United States is, even though people here, it's very US centric, Anglo centric, it's just an incredible market. There are lots and lots of people here. Duolingo's built a fabulous business here. And so we think there's a huge opportunity here. And there'll be more to announce for that very, very soon, I think.
Cool. Do you feel like there are opportunities for Speak to help teach people things, other areas of education through AI? Or do you feel like Speak will always be focused on the namesake, which is speaking and language?
I think like obviously there's a lot more to be done in the language space, even just like other parts of it, B2B for children in classrooms for really advanced users, et cetera. Lots and lots of things left to do there. But I think that at the same time, one of the like biggest and most exciting opportunities when it comes to like AI and changing the world and like creating real value for the world is education. Education, I think, traditionally has been like, an underperforming, not as exciting area of like venture capital investment and companies in general. Like the companies just aren't that exciting. There's not that many success stories. There's a whole graveyard. They're actually like ironically, the reason why it's so exciting now is also the reason why there's been nothing exciting so far, right? Which is the reason that like technology hasn't disrupted education yet. People are still learning in the same way that they learned basically 100 years ago, basically since the Industrial Revolution when we invented the modern classroom. And there's just so much more room for improvement. Like fundamentally, you go back 2,000 years, the way that like Plato learned, or anyone back in ancient Greece, was the best way. The way that the most privileged people learned was like a one-on-one tutor, and so that hasn't changed since then. But the fact remains that like virtually everyone they don't have access to that. So that's the holy grail for education. It's like one of the only things in education that's been like scientifically actually proven out. The Bloom's 2 sigma effect in terms of outcomes for personalized education. And so I think like there's just a tremendous opportunity here. I think we're well positioned for it, but I'm also not arrogant enough to think that like we have the right to win here. There's going to be so many interesting things. I'm really fascinated to see what Khan Academy does. I think that's a really cool opportunity for them as well. But yes, we're certainly going to be thinking about all sorts of things outside of language eventually, or at least that's the ambition.
If you weren't building Speak, where else do you feel like there's huge opportunity within AI at the moment?
Yeah, I think like there's a few different frameworks you can think about here, but like I think one of the biggest ones here is like thinking about the stakes of a use case. And there's a certain amount of value that's unlocked when you become an assistant, and that's a total category of use case. Copilot for X, that will be a thing for sure. That's the majority of use cases I feel like right now, especially on the enterprise side. I think that fundamentally the most interesting long-term enduring companies though are playing in the spaces where the stakes are low enough, or the models will get sufficiently good enough to be above the stakes, if that makes sense, such that you can have something that truly replaces a human altogether. The economic, GPT-4 isn't that much cheaper right now than a human. And so like when you can really replace the human altogether, that's where you get the true kind of explosive margins of software. And that is where you like really unlock the like real value. And so, what that means, I think people can think about that for themselves. But I would say like fundamentally like the most interesting things I think are like where that is an opportunity. Not to say that the like Copilot for X isn't also very interesting. But that's like one way I would think about it.
It's really easy to see like the upside case for that, and the way that it'll give so much time and productivity back to people. I mean, how do you feel about the downside cases of that, like replacing humans net across the board? What will happen in that scenario?
I mean, yeah, I don't think I'm an expert in that. I would just caveat it with that, like really take it with a grain of salt. But if I were to speculate, like I'm fundamentally an optimistic person. I believe that technology historically has almost always been mostly used for good. There's obviously always the flip side of that. I do think there's a danger if we like basically get to AGI too quickly and we're not able to, properly handle that. That's like the risk that I'm more concerned about, candidly. I think in terms of like the economics of it, like everything is accelerating. This will happen faster than the last technology wave. But I do believe that fundamentally we're just in a better world with this technology. We're able to continue to like remove the yoke from humans in terms of doing the work that isn't fulfilling for the people and is just purely a paycheck, and fuel economic growth and be able to just unlock better jobs. So I fundamentally think that's the case, but I also do know there's totally a flip side here for the people that are, maybe later in their careers and less willing to like make a transition. And that's really tricky. I don't have the answers there, but at the same time, this is inevitable. Like I do think like fighting against it is kind of like trying to, fight quicksand or swim up a river that's just flowing the opposite way. Like it's hard to do. And so I think it's one of those things where we need to just figure out how to embrace it.
You mentioned earlier in the conversation that when you were thinking about Speak, it was pretty clear like when it was going to get good enough by feeding it enough data. And you also mentioned early on that one of the coolest things you could do with AI is build effectively sentient AI. Like, I'm sure this question gets asked to you often, but you've been ahead of the curve for so long. Like, when is that going to happen?
When is sentient, like when is like basically AGI going to happen?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I feel like, the classic thing here is like, it's going to be like 5 to 10 years away or beyond. I think it's very tricky. I think it's very unclear what that even means. Can GPT-4 pass the Turing test? Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously.
That's what we thought. That's what we thought AGI was up until recently. Are we going to continue to move the goalposts? Probably. Human level intelligence is a little bit arbitrary. It's important in the narrow case. I'm not sure it's important in like the macro case. I think the bigger like concern is like if there's like a runoff where it just continues to accelerate really quickly and exponentially, and that's like the super intelligence scenario. I think it's pretty clear that that's probably not that likely. At least it's not going to be like, oh, you were going to blink our eyes and it's going to happen. I think we're fundamentally very clearly constrained by NVIDIA, basically, and GPUs. And 5 years ago, when everyone was thinking about reinforcement learning, I was more concerned about that. But like, if it's going to happen with this and also, by the way, I think there's like some hard limitations. Like the transformer, we're squeezing a lot of juice out right now, but we're going to need to make some breakthroughs to get to the next level. I'm pretty convinced of that. So that's why it's indeterminate how long it will take, because there will need to be some fundamental new breakthroughs, I believe. I think fundamentally, like 5 years ago when when everyone was focused on reinforcement learning, it was less clear what the kind of like limiting factors would be for acceleration. And I think now it's like pretty clear compute and energy are those. So like it's only going to get so much, like NVIDIA will only get so much better at making really, really good A100s and stuff over the next time. And I don't think we're close yet in terms of having the compute to be able to easily to be able to get to the point where that's the case. When compute doesn't become the limiting factor, that's when I would be more nervous about this happening and having the runaway scenario. But as long as that's the case, look, you can monitor how much electricity certain supercomputer cluster is using, and like that's a pretty good proxy for kind of like the level of complexity and reasoning that the system can use. So that's why I do think OpenAI's approach here is very reasonable, and I do think they genuinely care about AI safety and all of that, and I think like I'm pretty sure they view it not that differently than that as well.
Connor, anyone listening to this interview, I'm sure finds Speak to be fascinating. So I have to ask, is Speak hiring?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. I mean, basically, if there's anyone that's super interested in this, especially if you're technical, we'd love to talk to you. Definitely anyone on the kind of engineering, product design, machine learning stack, we're looking to hire across the board there. And definitely the right kind of ops hire or growth hire as well. So yeah, definitely please reach out. You can just go to speak.com/careers to find out more and get in touch with us.
And for people who are in the markets where you're currently focused, how can they try the product?
Yeah, just go to our website, speak.com, and you can download the app from there. And always love feedback, especially if it's in our new markets. I'm sure there's things we can do to improve.
How can they give the feedback?
There's an easy way to give feedback directly in the app, or you can just shoot us a line at contact@speak.com.
Awesome.
Or feedback@speak.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Connor, thank you so much. This was an incredible conversation. Appreciate you giving us all this time, and hope to have you on again sometime.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This was awesome. Great questions.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Connor. Follow Generative Now wherever you get your podcast, on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and YouTube and wherever else you listen. Also, if you enjoyed the episode, please do us a favor and rate and review it. It really, really helps. If you want to hear more from me or Lightspeed, follow me @Mignano on X or Twitter or LinkedIn, Instagram, everywhere. And if you want to follow us at Lightspeed, you can find us @LightspeedVP on all those same platforms. Thanks again to Connor for the awesome interview. And Generative Now is produced by Lightspeed in partnership with Pod People. Special thanks to everyone on our production team for making this podcast possible. We will be back next week with another awesome conversation, so don't miss it. See you next time.